Hi, the Australian Commonwealth Government has made a number of changes to superannuation, or rather is proposing them. And I want to ask the question whether these changes are fair or effective. So just a little bit of background. This is not financial advice. Go see a professional if you want financial advice, because A, they've got the training, they can take into account your circumstances, and you can sue them if they go wrong. So why has the government made the changes? Basically, if you've been following any of the press releases, the announcements, it's because some people have really huge balances in superannuation. And by the way, if you're not from Australia, New Zealand, or one or two other places, superannuation funds are what we in Australia call things that are called pension funds elsewhere. So the argument is basically this. Clearly, some people have used the concessional taxation treatment of superannuation as a way of building wealth subject to concessional tax, and in some cases building building inheritances for their descendants. So the government is making some changes which it claims will collect some of the tax which was avoided, or if you want to be more emotive, which was rorted. Now, notice it claims, because it's not clear that these claims stack up. So I'm going to ask two questions. I'm going to do these in reverse order. So the second question I'm going to ask is, do the changes actually achieve what the government says? And looking at the amount of tax collected and the incentives or the optimal responses to what's going to happen, it's not clear that this is going to be the case. In fact, really rich people are going to get around this quite easily. Important people who are less rich, or people who are medium, and you'll be surprised by the numbers, are actually going to have it difficult. So the first question I want to ask is, are the changes fair? So what's changing? And this is based on announcements until today, 7th of March. Basically, you're aware that there's a transfer balance cap, the amount you can move into zero taxation regime when you retire. That's 1.7. I think it's going up to 1.9 this year because of inflation. What the government is introducing is a total superannuation balance. This is not going to be inflation adjusted. And what it means is that if you're in pension phase, everything up to your transfer balance cap, 1.9, will be taxed at 0. Everything above that will be taxed at 15% until you get to 3 mil. And above 3 mil, it'll be taxed at 30%. Now, if you're not retired, that means everything up to 3 mil will be taxed at 15%. Everything above will be taxed at 30%. Okay? Now, a very important point to note is that 30% will be levied on all gains, including unrealised gains. So if your assets increase in value by 100,000, even if you haven't sold them to get that money, you'll pay tax anyway. This is not how income is normally taxed. And the reason the government's doing this is taxation of superannuation is hard. There's a lot of estimates and calculations that are too difficult to do unless they do this, or at least they say it's too difficult. If you make a loss, if it goes down in a given year, that loss will be carried forward. And as I've already said, the 3 million threshold will not be indexed for inflation. All right, now here's the thing that really surprised me. And it surprised me 2 hours ago when I did this spreadsheet. I did these calculations to work out. There's an argument that the only people who have 3 million in super by age 65 are really rich people. That 3 million is excessive. And when I did the numbers, it turns out you can get to 3 million with a reasonable contribution. In fact, this is the level of contribution I'm making with annual compensation. So that's a total package, salary plus super, of 59075, 59,000. That is less than the average wage. Okay, so let's look at how I got to those numbers. Sorry. Just going to make sure this is still recording because something weird happened here. So the question I'm asking, do only rich people have 3 million in super? One of the early press releases suggested that to have a 3 million balance, you must have earned 200,000 a year. Now that's untrue. Look, I've never made near 200,000. Certainly never made over it. And I had a balance of 3 million at the start of last year. But to be honest, last year sucked. I think I went down by 20%. It's bounced back a bit. I'm down by about 10%. And I've never earned that much. And I'm 58, right? So why do I have that amount? How have I got 3 million at age 58 if I've never earned 200,000? Well, I'm going to tell you my story, and then I'll do some numbers to work out, well, how much can you get in there with? I went into super at age 24. And because I work at unis, at that stage, you were forced to put in 20.5% of your total compensation. Now, how I calculated that, if you're at a uni and the number sounds wrong, give me a buzz and I'll tell you how I calculated that. Now, I didn't have a choice. A few years later, I did have a choice, but I kept putting that amount in. Why did I do it? Because two reasons. Superannuation saves me from my own stupid decisions. I've made a few weird decisions in trying to buy stocks and they haven't really worked out for me, buy shares. The uni super people, their management team is actually pretty good and they invest pretty sensibly. I've chosen a high level of risk, but I'm happy with what they've been doing. Secondly, I knew that 9.5% is not going to give me enough for a reasonable retirement. Right? When I retire, I want to continue earning how much I'm earning. In fact, to be honest, given I'd like to take holidays and stuff, I'd like to earn more. But that's sort of luxury. I at least want to be on what I'm on at the moment. So I made sacrifices. I was paying that much more into super, but I didn't have frequent overseas holidays. In fact, to be honest, I've only had 2, I think. If you see me, and you'll probably look me up on social media, when I'm overseas, usually it's because I've attached a day or 2 on a conference either side. And the sort of, profligate lifestyle that some people lead, I've just put more money into super. The other thing I did was I chose a high risk investment. I chose the highest risk available, which at that stage was known as high growth in uni super. Why? Well, risk is correlated with return. And in the long run, you face more risk, but you face more return. It pans out in the long run. And, what is super if not a long run commitment, long run putting money away? So let's do some numbers. And I'm going to make some basic assumptions. The uni super management team are actually quite good. And so, by the way, I'm doing all this in real terms, inflation adjusted terms. So you don't need to take out inflation and calculate stuff back later. So the return on average has been about 11% or thereabouts. Let's assume 3% inflation. So I've had an average rate of return of about 8%. Bear in mind that varies. In the high growth, high risk strategy I've got, I lose 1 year out of 4. But in other years, it's bigger than that. I think my best year was about 16%. But, I'm not going to run a simulation for this because, I've already spent a few hours prepping the spreadsheet and stuff. We're doing it in real numbers. I'm going to assume payments are made fortnightly, so 26 times a year. And I'm going to assume that you started super contributions at age 24, you retire at 65. Okay, so I'm going to ask the question, how can you get to 3 million at 65? Okay, so to calculate, so I'm trying to work out the annual salary. How much do you need to make? Your total compensation, including super, that's X. That's what I'm trying to work out. If it's an 8% per annum rate of return, add 1, take the 26th root and take off 1 to get a fortnightly rate of return. And that, by the way, is the after-tax real rate of return on uni super high growth. So even though there's 15% tax being levied on that, I've just taken the after-tax rate. There are 1,066 periods. That's 41 years times 26 fortnights per year. And we're looking to get to a final value of 3 million. So what are assumptions? I'm going to say that the fortnightly after contribution tax contribution is C. I need to work that out from an annuity formula in order to work back to the salary that we need. Bear in mind that contributions are taxed at 15%. So if I put $100 into super, 85 ends there, 15 ends up in the ATO, the Australian Tax Office. So the amount of contribution that I make, if I want to work that back to what my salary or what my compensation must be, I need to undo that tax, so gross it back up from 85% to 100%. And if the contributions I'm making are 20.5%, I divide by 0.205 to get back to my salary. So the salary to get me to that 3 million is X, and I calculate that from C using that formula there. Now, how do I get C? Well, I use the standard future value of an annuity formula, which is shown for you down there. And I've done that over in Excel. Oh, sorry. So coming over to Excel, and the Excel sheet will be provided as a link. I put those assumptions in there. You can check the formulas if you like. So do formula auditing. You can turn all those arrows on to see what I've done. And look, it turns out that with that rate of return and that level of contribution, you can get to 3 million at age 65, making just under 60,000 a year. Now, don't believe me? Well, join me, right? I mean, I didn't believe it. I thought, my God, that is insane. That's less than the average weekly wage, and you can have 3 million by age 65. Okay? So because I didn't sort of believe it, or I wanted to check it, I did a little table down here, and I said, okay, here's your fortnight in life. By the way, when you're 24 years old, you're 624 fortnights old. I think, let's see, equals 24 times 26. Yeah. So your first fortnight investing is fortnight 625. So there's your contribution of 395. That's the amount we've worked out here. There's a return on the opening balance, which is 0 in the first month, but then it comes off that rate of return and the opening balance. We work all the way forward, and just when you're turning 65, you've got 3 million. Sorry about the format there. Let's just, that's 3 million. Right, so you get to 3 million by age 65 on a total compensation package of just under 60,000. So the myth that only rich people get to 3 million is rubbish. You can earn less than average weekly wage. You put aside 20.5%, you put it in a high risk strategy, you will have that. Again, this is not investment advice. So the idea that only rich people have 3 million is frankly a word starting with B and ending in T with 8 letters. So we've debunked that. Not only rich people have 3 million. So a lot of people are going to be surprised when they turn 65, at least anybody who's been making sensible contributions, they're going to be surprised. And if anybody thinks that the government's mandated 9.5%, now 10%, is going to give you a comfortable retirement, well, to quote the castle, you're dreaming. Right. So the second question is, doesn't matter what you believe so far about what I've said so far. Even if you don't believe the numbers, and I invite you to download this spreadsheet and check it. But even if you don't believe that, the next question is, will this new arrangement work? And I'll tell you up front, I'll give you the results in advance. It will not work. It won't work for two types of people. There are some people who have humongous balances, and they have those large balances because when there weren't or where there were loose restrictions on contribution, those people put a ton into super. Now, the thing is, restrictions have been tightened up over the last 10, 15 years. So those people are old, and those people with really huge balances are old. They will die soon. The money will leave super, and it will be taxed in their descendants' hands outside super. Alternatively, what if they don't leave? I will show you that they have an incentive to move their investments outside super, because then they get to avoid the tax on paper gains, and in fact, they get to choose when they are taxed, right? So this is what it's going to do. So two possibilities. They're either going to take it out of super, but, if they take it out of super, they're going to face tax on a normal income. So we assume rich people have no incentive to take it out. 30% in super, 47% marginal tax rate outside super. Well, let's come back to the really rich people a little later, and I'll show you why that's not the case. We assume that ordinary people have an incentive to do. Well, let's look at 3 situations. Really rich people, ultra big balances, large balances, and I called it ordinary people, but I sort of really mean, let's face it, medium balances, because a lot of people have not been putting enough into super. Maybe I'm paranoid about being, alone, whatever, in my old age, so I put more than other people. So, I've already said this. How did ultra rich people get ultra big balances? They put tons of money in when there were few restrictions on putting in. The only restriction was in concessional taxation when you took it out. So the restrictions were when you took it out, reasonable benefit limits, etc. So these people weren't actually avoiding tax, they were delaying tax. They'd have to pay it as soon as they retired. Okay? So these people were basically delaying tax. Now remember, there are now restrictions on large contributions, so these people are going to be leaving pretty soon, usually through death. So the tax effect on taxing these guys is not going to be big for long. But while they're still alive, they've still got the incentive as large balance people. So let's look at large balance people. I'm going to assume here, I'm going to work with somebody who's got, what did I say? I think I said 3 million balance. Sorry, did I say 3 million? Let's read through my assumptions here. Assume the person retired on 1st July 2023. They've got a start of year balance of 10 million and an annual income from this of 100 million, of 1 million. So if they've retired, they've got a transfer balance cap of 1.9. At least it will be if they retire on 1st July 23. So that portion of the income, 1.9 out of 10 of the 100,000, is going to be taxed at 0. And you look over here on the right, that's the bottom layer. The next part, the bit between 1.9 and 3, so the 1.1, income on that is 1.1 tenths, so that's 110,000. That'll be taxed at 15% if it's normal income or 10% of its realised capital gains. For the moment, let's just assume it's regular income like dividends and stuff. So there's 110,000 of income there. 15% tax on that will be 16,500. The next part relating to the 7 million above 3 mil will be taxed at 30%. So the income relating to that 7 million portion is going to be 700,000, 7% of your total income of $1 million, and 30% tax rate on that will be 210. So the total tax under the new system will be 226,500. Okay? Which is more than I make in a year. Okay, let's compare that to the existing situation. The existing situation has, if you're retired, the first bit below the transfer balance cap is taxed at 0. Everything above is taxed at 15. So a person like that with 10 million who's made $1 million of income under the existing system would make 121,500, would pay 121,000 of tax. Under the new system, they'd pay 226,000. So the tax seems like it makes sense. It'll slug these people for more. But it'll only slug them if they don't change anything, right? And if you know you're going to face a higher tax rate in super, maybe you can take it out and face a lower tax rate somewhere else. So why would you leave it in super? Now still, we're assuming no capital gains. So the in super is 15% for the concessional, 30% for the above 3 million. So I'm going to use 2024 tax rates. I just downloaded them off the tax ATO website today. I'm going to include Medicare. And I've done some numbers, and again, the spreadsheet that I put up, sorry, I will actually reformat this so you can see everything. The spreadsheet I've done here is you can put in an amount of income here at the top, and over here it works out how much income, how much tax you pay. So if you have 200,000 of income outside super, tax normally, including Medicare, you'll pay just over 30%. But if you have 100,000, you'll pay about 24.97. And, the closer you get, I think the limit is about 166, somewhere like that, it's about 30%. So the closer you get to 166, on average, you're avoiding less tax. So let's assume, you take 100,000 out. Sorry, you derive 100,000 of your income outside super. Or let's say 105. What did I say, 105? Oh, look, the numbers are slightly out. I think I actually said 100. So the percentage there is right. This 105 here should actually be 100. So that's going to give you a 24.97 tax rate outside super, including Medicare. And that makes sense, right? So if you can have that taxed at a lower rate, what are you going to do? On the left, you've got what we had before, that 226,000. On the right, what the person has done is they've taken 1 million outside super. Remember, the 10 million made them 1 million of income. So 1 million makes them 100,000 of income. So they've taken the 1 million outside super, and so some of the 1 million income they had before is now being taxed outside super. And as you saw from that spreadsheet, it's taxed at 24967. So if they take up to 166,000, but in this example, if they take 100,000 out, they get to avoid about $5,000 worth of tax. So, they can avoid a little bit. Is it worth their while? Maybe for people with a little bit above, above 3 million, it is. For really rich people, Now, I've assumed so far that there's no capital gains. And I've also made an assumption that, well, I haven't actually taken this into account, but what if you're a retired couple? Then you don't just have one lot of 3 million concessionally taxed. You've got two, one each person. Mind you, that's if you're both retired. And I'm stuffed here because my wife is quite a bit younger than me and she works low income. So I'm not going to have that added concession. You know, I can't really split it across 3 million because she won't have access to it until after I'm dead. So let's now move on to a situation with capital gains, because this is where you can really avoid it, right? I've chosen high growth. I've chosen capital gains mainly because that's part of what I've taken on in order to earn me a high rate of return. But if you're a really rich person, this is a way of avoiding tax substantially. So what if you've structured your investments in such a way that you only make capital gains and you only sell investments when you generate income, right? Now, bear in mind, we're talking about really rich people here, right? Or moderately rich. So they can make capital gains. Under normal income, they're not taxed. Capital gains aren't taxed until you actually make them, until you actually sell the asset. So what if they just sell a little bit to generate income? So I'm going to set up a really extreme example, because in reality, the reality will be somewhere between what you saw before and what you're going to see next. So let's say all your super increases in value, but at this extreme, you don't sell any of your assets. So they are all going to be paper gains. Under normal income tax, they would not be taxed. Paper gains aren't taxed. Real gains are taxed. They're taxed when you actually sell the asset. And then you look at the difference between, what, and when you sell the asset, by the way, they'll be taxed at half your top rate. I know people say that's a rort, but there's actually a good reason for that. Because capital gains for normal people, not for rich people, for normal people are lumpy. So if they were taxed at your top rate, normal people could avoid it. Rich people could avoid it, normal people couldn't. So let's have a look at a situation. Let's assume that all your gains are unrealized. They're paper gains, right? So you're a really wealthy person. You've got enough money outside super that you don't need to sell your super. You haven't sold any super investments. So all of them are paper gains. So what's going to happen under the new regime is you've got that $1 million worth of income, but it's not real income, right? The value of your investments has gone up, but you haven't sold any of them. So 0 on the transfer cap, 0 on the concessional tax because there's no gains. But on the paper gain, the unrealized paper gain, there's a $700,000 amount your investment's gone up. Even though you haven't got the cash because you haven't sold them, you're going to be taxed $210,000. So your total tax there is going to be $210,000 under the new regime. Right? But remember, ordinary capital gains for normal income are not taxed until you actually make the profit. So if you're really loaded, you can delay selling. Rich people don't need to sell these assets and have the taxes happening. So, but in super, they will be taxed, even if they haven't sold the assets. So what's their optimal strategy? Take the amount above 3 million out of super and have it taxed in personal income. Because if they don't sell the assets, they won't pay any tax because they're not making any real capital gains. So here's the real situation. They've got a 1 million, they're all unrealized or paper capital gains. Now, on the left, if they're in super, they pay 210,000. What if they take 7 million of that $10 million investment outside super? Right? So the income, remember, a simple example. The income is 10% of your opening balance. So they've made 700,000 unrealized paper capital gains. They haven't sold the assets, so those are not real capital gains. For normal income tax, you don't actually get taxed on a profit on sale until you actually make the sale. So if they've got that unrealized paper capital gain and they have it all outside super, that's the blue bit, they're not going to pay any tax. So they will eventually when they sell it, but they get to choose when or whether they sell. And if they're really rich people who are using this as an investment vehicle, it's not going to get sold. It's not going to get crystallized until someone inherits it. So they're basically delaying tax. They get to choose when to pay that tax. Well, except for the death thing when they will pay, right? So they're delaying tax. So by levying this on really rich people with lots of unrealized capital gains, what are they going to do? They're just going to take that excess above 3 million out of super. By the way, I've labeled this example B. The previous one that had no capital gains, top right, I've labelled it example A, because I'm going to talk about the difference between the two. So look at example A, no capital gains, they were paying $221,467, and that's if they even took some out. If they kept it in super, $226,500. So reality is going to be somewhere between cases A and B, because first up, they're going to try to make most of their super in capital gains type assets, not dividend, rent, interest type assets. And secondly, they're going to do it outside super, where gains, interest and dividends are taxed all the time. That's not a problem. But the capital gain stuff only gets taxed when you get sold. So they've basically been delaying that. So what are very rich people going to do? They're going to take the bit out above 3 million out, and they're not going to sell any of those assets until they need them for spending. Okay? So if they're using it as an inheritance vehicle, we're going to be somewhere between A and B, but if they're using it as an inheritance vehicle, they're going to be closer to B. They're going to be paying stuff all tax. So will this tax actually get collected? No. Well, maybe on people who are not far above 3 million, because it's not worth their while. Where are you going to hire an accountant if you're on an income of 60,000, to do that sort of stuff for you? So, those people are on salaries of 60 to even 150, 180,000. They're going to be slugged because they're not going to have a different option. So ordinary people are disadvantaged. The really rich are going to get around this. So what about people with medium balances? I kept calling them ordinary people. That's a bit of a arrogant affectation to assume that I'm ordinary. Let's say you've got 4 mil, because this is what I'm hoping to have when I turn 65. When I turn 65, a balance of 4 mil theoretically will give me an income of around 160,000 a year. Actually, that's not true. There's a study done by financial analysts called the Trinity Study that says how much can you safely take out of your super, out of your pension, to make sure you don't run out of money before you die. And they basically say you can start taking out 4%. That's a safe drawdown, and there's about a 3 or 4% chance of running out of money over 30 years if you do that, right? Because shares go up and down. You can be totally screwed by 1 or 2 bad years. So by safe, we mean we adjust that amount for inflation, and you're reasonably likely that should be not run out of money before dying. What if you're like me? You've got a younger spouse. I can't just focus on 30 years. I've basically got to focus on a 60-year horizon because she's on a lower income and she's going to rely on this to survive or to live. So I'm going to have to play it safe, and I'm going to take out 3.5%. So what's 4 million going to give me as an income? 140,000. Admittedly, that's comfortable, but okay. So that's the sort of income. In fact, if you got to that 3 million by 65, based on contributing, on being, what was that amount? 60,000 that you put in, 59,000. Effectively, if you put enough aside, you can have a pay rise when you retire, and you'll have a comfortable retirement. It's actually worse than that, because my super income has got to do 3 things, right? Let's say you've got 4 million and you've earned 400,000 a year. What's it got to do? Yeah, it's got to give me some income. God, these numbers sound crazy, don't they? But that's only because I've put enough aside for my retirement. It's got to give me income. It's got to grow to account for inflation, right? And inflation's going crazy at the moment, isn't it? So, if I earn 10%, 6% is probably, well, God, does over 10%? I can't afford to put over 10% away to grow for inflation. So essentially, the real value of my super is going to go down. So it's got to grow to account for inflation. It's got to give me income. And remember, I'm in high risk. During the GFC, I lost 25%. Last few years, I lost 20%. So I've got to have a buffer there to mean that I keep earning even when it goes down. So I've got to sort of have a safety margin in there as well. So up until now, my supers had to do that with an after-tax 15% rate of return. Sorry, and that sentence is a bit weird. I think I've mistyped it, but I'm not going to fix it now. So now I've got to deal with a tax rate of 30% of some of my income. So what if I am lucky and my super does get to 4 mil? At 4 mil, the effective tax rate will be 18.75, right? Because 3 mil will be taxed at 15%. The rest will be taxed at 30%. So that's 18.75. Actually, it'll be a bit lower than that, because if I do actually retire then, the first 1.9 will be taxed at 0. But remember that as my balance grows, and it has to do those things above, the tax rate's going to get closer to 30%. But worse is I'm being taxed on capital gains I haven't actually made. These are changes in value. They're not things I've actually sold to make a gain. So, rich people can deal with not selling some of their assets. I need my super to be selling down my assets in order to give me that income. So, what should I do? Theoretically, somebody like me should take out the amount above 3 mil to avoid being taxed on unrealised gains. But for me, this is a problem. I bought a few shares, but I'm pretty bad at it. I've just chosen the wrong one. There's one or two that have done well, but generally they haven't done that well. So I'm not a big investor, and the UniSuper investment management team actually do a lot better than I can do. And even with exchange-traded funds, there's very few that do as well as UniSuper. I mean, I want to stay in UniSuper because those guys invest better than I can find anywhere else. But on the other hand, I'm going to be paying this higher tax rate, which I could avoid if I took it out. So rich people have workable strategies to get around this, right? They've got accounting and investment teams that work just for them, but not me. So overall, what's the answer to my questions? Is having a 3 mil balance by age 65 excessive? No, it isn't. You can get there based on 60,000. Shocking, but it's true, you can. The second question was, is it fair? Well, I think I've shown quite clearly that rich people can avoid this tax. So the government is saying that it will levy the tax to capture tax which is avoided. It is very easy to avoid that tax, and so that tax will not be collected. Thank you so much for listening. My apologies, I went for half an hour. Also, apologies for some of the typos there, but hopefully if you listen through it, you'll make sense of what I was trying to say.